Hello, everyone. Welcome to my session. My name's John LeDrew. I have been a software engineer for some 2 decades now, and I've done a whole load of different jobs during that time. But really, so far, for those of you that may or may not have been to GOTO Berlin a number of years ago, my session there earned me the fantastic ability to still, in fact, be listed on the first page of search results for the search term swearing and nudity, which frankly outdoes anything else I've achieved in 20 years. So this is a talk about stories, the stories that we tell others about who we are, the stories we tell about where we've been, the stories we tell about where we want to go, and maybe who we wish we were. So the time is about September 2000, and Harry and Sally meet for the first time when they start as graduates at the National Institute for Romantic Comedies. They were both excited about their new job, and everyone seemed really friendly. They were both feeling optimistic, energized, and positive. After their first meeting, Alf, one of the older team members, commented on how cheery the new starters were. He said, "They don't know what it's really like yet." Now the place is Bromley, southeast London. The year 1934. The time about 10:23 in the morning. Gillian, aged 8, sits in the school classroom, twirling her long, dark hair through her fingers, staring out of the window, daydreaming as her legs swing idly back and forth under her chair. "Gillian!" The teacher's voice echoes across the classroom, and as a hand slams down on Gillian's desk, the ink pot flies up in the air, spraying ink all over her page. Gillian sits bolt upright, stares up at the teacher. "Yes, miss?" The teacher glares down at Gillian and glares down at her work and sees the mess, her eyes peering over spectacles balanced on the end of her nose. "What a mess! You'll have to start again." But you splashed my ink," Gillian protests. "I can see your handwriting, and the ink is of no consequence. I cannot read a word of it anyway. Start again, immediately, or you're going to the headmaster." Gillian sighs, dips her pen in the ink pot, and starts the work again. Her feet start to swing back and forth again, kicking the floor. "Gillian, for the last time! Please just sit still and stop wriggling about." "Sorry, miss," she says, crossing her feet under her chair to stop them wriggling. A moment later, a small piece of scrunched up paper hits Gillian on the back of her head. It falls to the floor under her chair. She turns to the girl sat behind her, but she just shrugs in feigned innocence. A quiet giggle spreads across the room as Gillian reaches under to pick up the paper. And as she begins to open it, "Gillian, for the last time, for goodness sakes!" The teacher almost makes Gillian fall to the floor, but the teacher grabs her by the wrist and pulls her up to her feet, snatching the piece of paper out of her hand as she does so. "What is this?" the teacher says. She unravels the piece of paper. The class falls deadly silent as the teacher begins to read. "Wrigglebottom?" The class bursts into laughter. The teacher sighs. "Just sit down, Gillian, and see me afterwards." The time is March 2017. The place, Manchester. My house. My partner of nearly 13 years has just told me she wants to leave me. I knew the relationship had been struggling, but I was blind to the reality. It completely threw me. I was still very much in love, and we have 2 children. I was stuck between the sheer panic of the loss for the relationship and the sheer panic of what the hell happens now. We've been together since I was 19, and over the years, as we grew up together, we also grew apart. It seemed like everything was collapsing, not just the relationship, but my entire identity. I realized that I'd become a we before I knew who me was, and now without that we, who the hell was I? So trapped in a crisis of identity, I set out to try to recreate myself. I wanted to transform myself to be anyone else, just not the broken person I felt I was. So I'd like to invite you all to close your eyes for a moment and then take a deep breath, hold it for a second, and then breathe it out as slowly as you can. And now just let your breathing return to normal. And just bring your attention to your breath, that sensation of breathing. Just take a few breaths in your own time. Now I'd like you to really think about this question. Who are you? Who are you really? Now I don't mean who you want to be tomorrow or in 10 years. I mean, think about who you are here, right now, in this room, this second, right now. Who are you? And is this who you are to everyone else? Who else knows this person? Maybe lots of people. Maybe just a few. Maybe just you. Hold on to that. Now, take a few more breaths in your own time, and then open your eyes. So a few months go by, and now they are told by leadership, with some fanfare, that the organization is going agile. And so are they. The other team on Harry and Sally's floor, they've already gone agile, whatever that means, and apparently they are doing really well. Someone called an agile coach came in and said they're all supposed to start using these things called stories, and no one can say how long anything is going to take anymore. They just have to say how many points it is. And, some of the team seem pretty resistant to these ideas, but Harry and Sally heard about this agile thing in university, so, they're kind of happy to go along with it. That lunchtime, Sally created a Jira ticket and assigned it to Harry. It said, "As Sally, I would like Harry to accompany me to lunch so that I can get to know him." She estimated it at 8 points. So later, the school wrote to Gillian's parents and said that she might have a learning difficulty and might be better off in a special school. Gillian's mother leapt into action. She put Gillian in her best dress and put her hair in pigtails. And she took Gillian to be assessed by a psychologist. They arrive at this grand Victorian building in London and are shown through to a large oak-panelled room lined with shelves of leather-bound books. The psychologist, an imposing man in a tweed jacket, invites Gillian to sit on a huge leather sofa. Her feet don't quite reach the ground. It's so large. She was so nervous about the impression she would make, she sits on her hands so she doesn't fidget. He walked back over to his desk and asked her mother about all of the problems Gillian was having. And her mum told her about her handwriting and how easily distracted she was and how she would always disrupt the class and was always getting into trouble. The psychologist didn't talk to Gillian, but the whole time he was talking to her mother, he watched her closely. This made Gillian feel really uncomfortable, and listening to what her mother was saying, it seemed that she was convinced that there was something wrong with her. The coach left after 6 months, and at first things seemed okay. But soon the team started to struggle. The same things kept coming up again and again in the retrospectives. And those same things made the team fail again and again. Harry and Sally would have lunch together most days. They could have a good moan about everything. Despite their frustration, it was nice to have each other around. Harry liked Sally. She made the last few months tolerable. She was smart, confident, funny, everything that he felt he wasn't. Out of his league, obviously, but he was glad they could be friends all the same, especially with the way things had been going. They just didn't get it. It all seemed to be going so well. They even launched on time. But then it just started falling apart. It seemed that there wasn't enough time for anything, and the pressure just kept increasing. The team couldn't work out what they were doing wrong. So I think a lot of us have seen a situation like this. You have a wonderful, talented Agile coach that arrives at some organization and tells them all about all the brilliant Agile they're going to be doing. And at first, maybe they're a little skeptical, but pretty soon they all get in the swing of things. And by the time the coach leaves, they're all, scrummed up to their Kanbans and really digging the vibe. Perhaps initially things go brilliantly, but the things that worked before just don't seem to work anymore. And people start to get stuck and queues start to build up in all the wrong places. But it's okay, their Agile coach left them a manual so they can check to see what they are inevitably doing wrong. You see, when we're working with teams who are really new to a concept, and this doesn't have to be some Agile methodology or process, it can be anything. Someone who's new to something, if things don't work for them, your first assumption is that you've got it wrong, that you don't know what you're doing because this is a new concept, this is a new idea. They're very, very unlikely to assume that the process that seems to be working so well for so many other people just isn't right for your context. It's almost like the Instagram problem. You don't hear that many teams talking about how shit they're doing. So just before we separated, I had taken a decision. I was working in largely technical positions and had been doing so for about 17 years. And I wanted to reorient my work so I was working with a kind of more people-first approach, more coaching. So I left my technically oriented consultancy role and started to try to rebrand. And then my partner left me. So I was unemployed, broke, newly single, abandoned, alone, and I had no idea who I was. So, feeling like a protagonist in my own sci-fi cliche, I did what anyone would do. I accepted a speaking gig in Detroit. So I was also going to be running a workshop, but as I wasn't known at all, I sold a total of no places, and I ended up with 2 days to myself in Detroit. So I decided to go and explore the city. I wandered out into the city with my camera for a couple of days. Now, I'd never visited Detroit before, but as I walked the streets, I got the feeling of a city rising from the ashes. It's a city with problems, I mean, huge problems that have been with it for over half a century now. But it's full of hope. The people are so full of hope. Now, I was having a wonderful time, but my friends and family were worried about me. I was reminded of the dangers of looking like a dumb white tourist wandering around the wrong parts of town. And I had a phone call from my mum that just started, darling, you know there are guns in America, don't you? So on the last day, I'd been exploring downtown Detroit, and I realized essentially that I'd left my bag back at the little Airbnb that I'd been renting on the edge of Midtown. And I had my spare, the battery in my camera had died, my wallet was in my bag, and I just had a dollar or so in change in my pocket. So yeah, a taxi wasn't happening, so I started the sort of half an hour walk back up to my apartment. As I turned a corner, a man stamps out in front of me. He is filthy. He has plastic bags wrapped around his feet and a gash on his forehead. He just looks at me, looks at the camera, just says, "Hey man, take a picture of me. I'm the real Detroit." So how do we respond to changes, either personal or professional, especially really big or sudden changes? Just shout out, anyone. How do we deal with change? What's the emotion? What do we feel? Any ideas? Insecurity, that's pretty good. Any more? What's that? Resistance, that's another good one. What do you think leads to resistance? Why do we resist it in the first place? That's an action we take, but what might be the emotion that we feel first? Any ideas? Fright? Did someone say fright? Yeah, fear, fright. What was that? Threatened, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The ones I often hear, sorry, what was that? Uncertainty, yeah. What was that? Possibility. Let's see, possibilities. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a bit. Optimism, I like that. I like that. Yeah, panic, fear. Fear is generally the thing that we tend to find. So in his 1962 book, Professor Everett Rogers popularized a thing called the diffusion of innovations theory. You might not have heard that name, but you definitely, almost certainly have heard this. So this seeks to explain essentially how, why, and at what rate people adopt new ideas and concepts, technologies, things like that. So people might have heard of this. So in any group, the first 2.5% are the innovators, the people that see possibilities in the proposed change or technology. Then you have the early adopters, the people that will eventually pick something up. And then eventually you have the early majority, then the late majority, and then the laggards who might never touch any of those things. How long do you think humans have behaved like this? Since the first iPhone? Hundreds of years, thousands, millions? Well, another fabulous go-to speaker, Linda Rising, totally gave me this nice story. So imagine early humans. We're wandering around, whatever, little scraps of lion skin around, protecting our essentials from the world, and we suddenly notice, well, let's just say, for the sake of example, 2.5% of us notice this amazing berry bush. And we start, obviously, that 2.5% of us, they start eating that berry bush because all they see is optimism, possibilities, and seriously yummy berries. The next 13.5% are kind of hanging around. They're like, oh, those berries, they're pretty tasty. We'll give them 24 hours. We'll give them 24 hours, see what they look like in the morning. The next 34%, that early majority, maybe a few weeks later now, they're like, oh, well, those berries, a lot of people seem to be eating those berries. I mean, they seem to be okay. Nah, you know what, we'll give them a couple of weeks. Let's just make sure they don't grow a third arm or something. The late majority, now by this point, it's like the majority, it's like, all right, I guess we can eat the berries. I mean, they're all eating the damn berries, you know. The laggards, they might never touch the berries. Doesn't matter how great they are. Can you see why this might be beneficial to us as human beings? What this tells me is that as a human race, subconsciously, evolutionarily, we're totally cool with 2.5% of our population sacrificing themselves for the good of the many. So if you feel like you fall into an innovator category, just bear in mind what the rest of the population really think of you, you know. And sadly, in the technology world, we have a bias towards innovators, which isn't a huge surprise. So, you know, we really are the self-sacrificial lambs of the human race in the tech sector. What emotion do you think drives that? Well, there we go. I gave the answer away because I hit the wrong button. It's pretty obvious. What stops us from eating the berries? It's fear. Fear drives that. The reason why we don't eat the berries is because actually we all have, or the majority of us have, an instinctive fear reaction to any new idea, new concept, new thing, new food. You see that for those of you that have young children, you know, trying to introduce new food to young children, there's an instinctive disgust. It's the first time they really experience that disgust emotion, and they experience it when they see whatever, a plate full of broccoli. And that's because it's a really good survival mechanism to basically reject absolutely everything until you're forced to eat it eventually. Because if you do that, you're way less likely to eat poison. That's basically the reality. Way less likely to eat something that might be poisonous. So the thing is there is always fear. With any team, if you are in a position, and whether or not you are a development manager or a tech lead or an agile coach or a CTO, I would say the majority of people that come to conferences like GOTO are frequently in a position where they are trying to encourage a group of people in their organization to adopt something new. Could be a new technology, could be a new way of working. So how the hell do we do that if on average, 97.5% of your team of any group are likely to be resistant? And even if you have a bias towards innovators, we're not saying the entire team would be innovators. That would be equally disastrous, actually, if that was the case. If that's the case, how do we encourage people towards positive change when we know that we will be dealing with fear responses in everyone? So, I was born in North London, a stone's throw away from Arsenal's old Highbury Stadium, for those of you that follow football. I actually don't, but it was a useful local landmark. And after 3 primary schools came and went, I started to get the feeling that this school thing really, really wasn't going to work for me. I love learning and still do, but this teaching thing was really getting on my tits. So just after my 10th birthday, we ended up also moving from multicultural North London to the less multicultural small village in the middle of North Yorkshire. So North Yorkshire, when I was 10, North Yorkshire was absolutely wonderful. By the time I got to 13 and the realization that I was at least an hour away from anything resembling civilization, it was a lot less wonderful. Now, I was still really struggling with school. My handwriting was awful, and one day, I think I was about 14, my teacher had a meeting with me and said, JP, I was called JP back then, you are an A-star student, but you're going to fail. You're going to fail everything unless you sort your handwriting out. And I thought, well, I go walking too far back. And I just thought, well, I've been trying or failing to learn now for 10 years at that point. I guess I'm not going to get my handwriting in shape in the next couple of years for my GCSEs. So I decided to leave school. Now, I remember very calmly sitting on my bed and explaining to my parents that I wouldn't be attending anymore and that I was going to homeschool myself until I was old enough to get a job, which at the time was 16, so I had a couple of years. Now, my parents were actually pretty supportive, but you see, my parents are puppeteers, so the fact that for me saying that I wanted to go into IT was kind of like the child of accountants saying I wanted to run away and join the circus. So I think the fact that I was at least deciding to go a sort of non-standard route just made them feel significantly more at ease. So at 16, I ended up getting a job for a small software engineering firm in London. I moved back to London, and I was living as a lodger in my old childhood home, which was now being rented out. My old childhood bedroom seems like a somewhat ironic place to start my new adult life. As you all know, at 16, you're unbreakable. But as you know, at 16, you're not unbreakable. And I was playing at adulthood. I was running faster than I ever could. And to keep up with the adults I was working with, and it was really hard work. Now, fast forward to just before my 19th birthday, and thanks to the pre-financial crash world, I was over £25,000 in debt. I was still trying to keep up with my peer group, still playing at adulthood. The credit cards finally dried up, but after finding a new job, I moved out to Windsor and came up with a nice new arrangement with my creditors. I got a really nice new flat, and I decorated it and had a housewarming party to show all of the grown-ups how much of an adult I was. I couldn't really afford the flat, and I couldn't really afford the party, but I couldn't admit those things. Still playing at adulthood. Now, fast forward 8 months, and I lose that job suddenly and unexpectedly. And now I've defaulted on the arrangement I had with my creditors, and I have no money for rent. I'm on the phone to my bank, and they've just told me that because of my new credit status, they would have to close my account. I broke down in tears on the phone to the agent. I'd completely failed. No job, no money. It was finally impossible for me to play at adulthood. I was smack bang in the middle of an adult situation. It was really shit. You spend your entire childhood wanting to grow up until you do. And then you just want to go back to when life is simpler. So, unemployed and broke, I moved back to London. And this time back into my old childhood bedroom. And now my dad was living there too. And shortly after that, I got into that relationship. And that lasted 13 years. It wasn't great for me, it wasn't great for them. And there I was, sat on that couch, thinking, if only I could transform myself, then everything would be better. So, drink first. I believe that when we look at teams or individuals or organizations, for that matter, we can break them down into 2 parts. What I call their context and their structure. So the context, that is the work that they're doing. So whatever that might be, that could be any of the things that they are trying to deliver. But then it also includes the people who are doing that work. And this context, this is a highly changeable thing. This changes all the time because work demands change all the time. You know, the work demands, so it could be the user need, business strategy, government policies, whatever it might be. Any of those things can change the work that you need to be delivering as a team. And then the people who are working on the team are also highly changeable because people. And then you have the structure. So the structure is the process, the way the team work, but also the people who are doing it. Again, they come back into that. The structure is a team's response to their changing context. They are building the structure to support their changing context over time. So this chart tracks the structure and the context over time. So this orange line is the structure, and this nice wavy purple line is the ever-changing context. So in this case, what we have is a line, in this case, a structure that never changes, ever. Many people see that and they go, that is my organization. We are not agile at all. We never change for anything. It just takes forever. There might be changes in there, but you wouldn't see it unless you zoom out to the 200-year mark where you can eventually see a very slight movement. I've never seen an organization like that in 20 years, ever. The organizations that I've seen are a little more like this. Boosh, boosh, boosh. And if you are in this organization, it's a little more like let's just say, for the sake of example, this is about a year. This is, every few months. And it's like being punched in the face on one side and another change on the other side. People talk about large organizations as being like, say, oh, they take ages to change. It's like trying to turn an aircraft carrier. And I kind of agree. It's just this particular aircraft carrier with all of its people on board has the magic ability to turn 45 to 90 degrees in about half a second. And you can imagine what happens to the population of the aircraft carrier if you happen to be on that and it turns. Everyone is flat up against the wall and battered and bruised. Does anyone work in an organization where this resonates with, out of interest? Yeah. How's it feel when you're told, maybe I'm guessing on average 1 day's notice of a change like that? How does it feel? Bad. Bad. What about the after 12 months? How do you feel? Confused? Exhausted is the one I frequently hear. I've had someone describe this to me a little bit like metal fatigue. So there's an interesting thing. We use metal as a building material because of its inherent flexibility and its ability to respond to changing conditions. You build a skyscraper and you need it to be able to sway in the wind. You need the building to be able to breathe and move with changing temperatures. But you see, all of those things happen with some graduality? Don't know, not a word, a thing. You get what I'm saying. And if you instead take a piece of metal in your hand and bend it suddenly, and then you bend it back again, and you bend it again, that metal, which is specifically chosen for its flexibility and ability to change, will eventually break. The fibers break down, it heats up, and then it will snap. And that is what it's like being in an organization like that. And then we have this. A line where the structure is almost perfectly aligned to the context. What's interesting about this, and I think it's obvious what the journey is here, but what's interesting about this to me is that in these cases, these changes, which seem almost completely ignorant of the actual context that the team is working in, they are implemented from outside the team, almost always. Almost no teams choose to make a change like this on themselves. They just don't. Because the team is really close to their context, because they understand their context. Even if they're not consciously mindful of it, they are close to the context, which means they are the experts that are best placed to make decisions about the way to support it, because it's right in front of them. If you're in the C-suite of an organization, maybe some 10, 20 levels above the software teams that are delivering for you, then you just simply don't have the adequate information to make decisions about the day-to-day processes and flows of the teams that are operating. So it's all change again for Harry and Sally. They brought in a large consultancy firm and they restructured everything. So they assessed everyone based on their skills profile, and they've now assigned everyone into specific teams. Now, Harry and Sally are now working in different teams in different buildings, but they're still working on the same product. So they basically spend all of their time dealing with integration issues. Harry, me. But at least that's a nice excuse for Harry and Sally to still work together. Sally liked Harry. He was pretty much the only reason she was still there. He was kind, supportive, intelligent, and everyone said he obviously fancied her, just too shy to do anything about it. Sally submits a pull request and assigns it to Harry. It was full of merge conflicts. The description reads, "Oh, looks like there'll be a lot of conflicts to deal with here. Maybe we should tackle them over dinner." They meet that evening and decide to follow up again the following week. 8 months later, the leadership announces that half of their team was going to be made redundant due to current economic challenges. All the consultants seem to have disappeared as well, which is largely seen as a positive. But Harry and Sally's jobs are safe, thankfully, but it's obviously still a huge shock. But at least they're now back on one team again. Harry's now moved into Sally's apartment. She said he'd have to decide between his vintage computer collection, dated from 1986 to 2001, or his collection of comics. It was tough, but he decided on the comics. The computers now live in his parents' attic. So after more than 20 minutes, the psychologist stood up and invited Gillian's mother to step out of the room for a few moments for a conversation. As he walked out, he turned on a small radio that was on the shelf on one of the bookshelves in the room, and music started to play. As soon as the door closed behind them, Gillian leapt up out of the seat. All she wanted to do was dance. She leapt and twirled around the room, enraptured by the music, and immediately she felt more grounded, more herself. From the hallway outside, There we go. From the hallway outside the office, her mother and the psychologist watched on. And the psychologist turned to her mother and just said, "There's nothing wrong with your daughter. She's a dancer." And he recommended that she be enrolled in a dance school, which is exactly what her mother did. Later, in a later interview, Gillian said, everyone there, she says, everyone was like me. They needed to move to think. It was wonderful. This little 8-year-old girl grew up to be Dame Gillian Lynn, and who, before she died in 2018, had been a dancer and choreographer for over 75 years. She's involved in over 60 Broadway and West End productions, including Cats and Phantom of the Opera, to name just a couple. So the educationalist Sir Ken Robinson tells this story in his book, The Element. And what he's doing is he's talking about this idea about finding the work that most resonates with you. The work that you have a natural affinity for, the work that, as he calls it, the work that for you is play. When I wanted to transform myself, I was looking for someone else to be. But the thing I forgot, and I think that many people do, is that the best version of you is still you. So when we're born, we are as authentic as we will ever be. And we have no shame, no expectations. We are just us. And as we grow, we develop this wonderful thing called self-awareness. And that is in itself a fairly useful thing. But with self-awareness comes this sudden appreciation of all the things that we don't really like about ourselves and all the expectations that family, friends, and society have of us, and the gap between the reality. And we start to create the image of the person we wish we were. The if only I had that, could do that, could dance that, could be that person. And as much as possible, our outward self projects that person, but the gap between who we are and how we are gets wider and wider. And when we can't be ourselves, this creates this state known as cognitive dissonance. That is, whenever we are expressing outwardly something that's different on the outside, essentially being inauthentic. I really like to dig into the definition of words, and I find that looking at how the same words might be used in different contexts can be kind of interesting. So in music, dissonance is when things are unharmonious. So if you've ever had the joy of listening to somebody learning the trumpet on the first day or trying to practice the violin, or if somebody just tries to scratch their nails down a blackboard, we know that feeling. That feeling is this strange uncomfortableness in our stomachs. The interesting thing is we feel that with people too. When people are uncomfortable in their own skin, they're often uncomfortable to be around. We feel uneasy around them because we feel that. So the opposite of this is consonance. When things feel harmonious, when people are playing in tune, when people are singing in tune. We sense when people are comfortable in their own skin as well. We feel comfortable around people who are comfortable with themselves. This is a definition from this website, Sibelius Academy, and I pulled it out because I really love the personification in this description. This desire that dissonant intervals have to resolve back to consonance. To me, this is like this ever-increasing tension between the who we are and the how we are. If you imagine a piece of elastic between the two of them, and the further you are away, the more taut this elastic becomes. And the more energy it takes just to be. This is wasted energy. This is energy that could be invested on being the best version of you. Instead, we waste it on being someone that isn't you at all. I realized that I skipped a slide here. I'll just say it. So we can look at this through science as well. If you imagine a light bulb, So in science, we often look at physical reaction. We're trying to transfer energy from, let's say, electrical energy into light energy. Light's in this room. Now, a highly efficient physical reaction is going to allow, let's say, 100% of that electrical energy to turn into light. Nothing else comes out. But as we know, almost all things have friction, and as a result, that creates heat. Old tungsten light bulbs, for those of you that are old enough to remember them, would give off, in fact, the vast majority of the energy that went into them would come off as heat. As you know, if you tried to change a light bulb that's just blown and burn your hand. What's interesting is I think you can look at this with teams as well. If you imagine a team and you obviously put energy in the form of people, money, resources, etc. And if this team is a software team, they're probably going to be trying to deliver working software on the outside. Now, if the process that they are following is at odds with how they work, then that will create friction. That will create frustration. And as we know, energy doesn't go anywhere. That energy doesn't disappear. That energy just comes out in different things. And while we, at least I don't think so, notice our teams getting hot physically when they're working with inefficient processes, I've seen some pretty red-faced people at safe planning meetings, though, so maybe some of it does. But I find that what I think is that what actually happens is it comes out as cynicism and frustration and eventually burnout. So, as I said, I struggled at school, and it turns out that I'm dyspraxic and dysgraphic. The dysgraphia is what affected my handwriting, and still does, and dyspraxia affects a whole range of things. I have to really think about which way is left or right. That famous video with George Bush that everyone was taking the piss out of because he said left and right. I do that every single time I say it, especially if I'm facing a mirror or something else. I also lose things all the time. I can be pretty clumsy at times, and I really struggle tying my shoelaces. So any situation where I had to take my shoes off, going through the airport, changing at the gym, I would get lots of anxiety because I would sort of feel like it's not that I couldn't tie them again. It was more that it would take me ages, and who knows, I'd probably get my hair tangled in it, or I don't know, and then it would be a mess. So I discovered these silicone laces. Now, at the time, they were white because it was great. They looked just like normal laces. I could pretend to be someone that could tie their shoelaces. And what's more, because they were so kind of perfect, I looked like a pro. I mean, they're like perfectly tied. And one day I was going through Heathrow Airport, and I slipped off my shoe, and the top lace just went bing. Now, in my mind, absolutely every single person in Heathrow Terminal 5 at that very moment stopped what they were doing, turned around, fell silent, and stared at me with horror, and all screamed, "You fraud!" And as I walked through security, it was a bit like that scene in Game of Thrones. Shame, 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 with the bell tonguing. Obviously, that wasn't what happened in reality. That was all in my head. And what's interesting, there's a really nice paradox here, because we all spend a huge amount of time worrying about what everyone else is thinking about, like worrying that, that time if you're getting ready to go out, you're going out to give a talk at a conference, and you wash and you look at yourself in the mirror to make sure you're okay, and you realize there's this great big spot here. In your head, this spot is at least a third of the size of your face, obscuring most of it. And you try to sort of, what can I do? And then obviously it starts bleeding, and I'm bleeding now, and I can't. And then by the time you leave, there isn't in fact a head left. It's just a spot in your mind. And you're walking past, and everyone seems to look at you like this, and you're just like, oh my God, everyone's looking at my spot. But the funny thing is that no one cares, because you know what? No one is thinking about you, because everyone is spending all of their time thinking that everyone is looking at them. So one of my white silicone laces snapped, and I arrived. I was obviously traveling somewhere, and I arrived, and I went on Amazon with some desperation and ordered some laces. The only ones they had available to ship that day were rainbow laces. I didn't care that much. I didn't think about it. It was just Okay, I need them. I can't, it's too much for me to cope with. I put them in, and the next day in the office, I was making a coffee in the kitchen, and a colleague just said, "Oh, those laces look kind of cool." And I went, "Oh, yeah, it's because I can't tie my shoelaces. They're silicone, actually." I just said it. I remember just thinking, I just fucking said it. I can't believe it. I've just outed myself. And I never felt so free because the world didn't stop turning and the sky didn't fall. And I know it's a small thing, but it was just that realization that it was okay. And that was very much a start of a journey for me. And just that little bit more aligned to myself. So when a team has their ways of working dictated to them, they often find themselves working against a process that is not optimized to how they want to work and how they need to work. This is the same as individuals. If you imagine, you might have, we often see being authentic as an aspirational goal. It's like, I'd really like to be, you think of a celebrity who just seems so real, it's like, I'd love to be like them. But the thing is obviously you can't emulate someone else in order to be authentic. And this is the same for teams. You can't emulate another team that seems to be doing really well, because you know what? They're probably doing really well because they're doing all of the right things for them, for their work, for their context, for what they're doing for their customers. And chances are, I imagine, very likely actually, that unless you happen to be living in an organization that has developed cloning technology, there are different people in your team to the other team. And chances are their customers are probably even different. Even if they're internal customers, you're probably working on a different product to some degree, hopefully. You might not be, because there is dysfunction everywhere, but we'll see what happens. So the problem is if we end up trying to follow another team's process, then what we end up being is inauthentic. We are inauthentically following some other team in hope to get the same success that they are achieving. And what we end up doing is following the process, but not their process. As in our process, their process, the process, but not their process. And this is what I call contextual misalignment. It's really important as leaders and coaches to be guiding teams towards contextual alignment. And this does not mean telling them how to do the process or telling them what process is the right process. It is about guiding them to discovering their own process. And then, importantly, supporting them to discover and rediscover what it might be over time. Because it won't be the same thing today as it is in a couple of months' time, or even tomorrow. So a few months after the redundancies, the team gets a brand new coach in. Now, initially, everyone is very resistant. They're all still in shock from everything that's happened over the last year. But this new coach gives them a whiteboard, and they just call it a workboard. Anything they're working on goes on cards on this board. It has 3 columns: to do, doing, done. They don't tell them to write stories or make estimates or do anything. They just say, look, whatever you're doing, write it on a card, put it on the board. After a few weeks, the team get really good at doing that. Really good. And they begin to notice things about how they work, about how much stuff they're doing at the same time. And they think, wow, look, isn't it interesting? The times when we actually ended up, that time when we all worked together on that one task that was really tough, we did really well. That worked really well. Maybe all 10 of us doing 10 things at once isn't the best way to do it. Did you notice how long we spent in integration when we all did 10 things? They begin to notice things, and as a result, even though they still have their retrospectives every couple of weeks, the retrospectives seem a bit more valuable. They are able to make lots of little changes every time. And one of the things they do is they notice that they want to demo things more. So they just decide to draw a line in their done box Demoed, not demoed. It's a small thing. But it felt really good for the team to have some say in the way they were working. And they were making lots of small changes. Harry and Sally finally get to go on that holiday they'd been planning for ages. Harry tries to propose to Sally on top of the Eiffel Tower. She tells him that's way too cheesy and he should try again. And the next morning, he wakes up and there's a gift card waiting for him on the bedside table for a driving experience day. It just reads, enjoy yourself, love Sally, see you later. So he heads down to the track and spends 2 hours tearing around the track with the Stig. At the end, to Harry's surprise, the Stig gets down on one knee and proposes to him, takes off the helmet, and Sally is revealed. She just says, if you want a job doing properly. So after all of that, I end up face to face with a homeless drug addict in Detroit. Hey man, take a picture of me. I'm the real Detroit. Well, I thought, my mum's words ringing in my head, I guess I had it coming. I stopped and smiled and said, I'm so sorry. The camera's battery's dead. I'd love to take your photograph, but I can't. And then I paused for a moment and just said, and I left my wallet at home. I don't have anything else I can give you. I'm sorry. He looked at me and I looked back at him for what felt like hours. And then, breaking the silence, he just said, can I rap for you? That was very unexpected, but amazingly, in that circumstance, I knew that the correct answer is yes. So for reference, the answer is yes to that question. So this man, in this very strangely intimate setting, on the corner of a street at the edge of downtown Detroit, rapped for me. He told me his story. He told me how when you live with a heroin addiction and you have no money, you live with withdrawal every day. You live hit to hit. He told me how 2 nights before someone had kicked the shit out of him while he slept. He doesn't know who it was. He just woke up with a boot in his face. He told me about his wife. He told me about his daughter. He told me how much he missed them and how much he loved her. He told me how he left them to protect her from the him he was becoming. When he finished, I hugged him and thanked him. And we said goodbye, and I continued my walk up Cass Avenue. And a moment later, behind me, I heard someone speaking. Hey man, did you get anything? The voice said. Nah, my friend said. Told you, man, we're not going to get shit from people around here. The voice said. Nah, my friend replied. He listened to me. It's been a long time since anyone listened to me. After my relationship breakdown, I had to work out who the hell me was. But the thing I forgot is that the best version of you is still you, with all of your broken bits. But those things, like the sculptor's chisel, shape your life. They define who you are, and you will never be without them. You do your broken bits better than anyone else. They are your superpowers. They don't own you. You own them. Life is not about redefining yourself. It's about finding out where your boundaries are and accepting them. In a sculpture, its boundaries are what make it beautiful. And they can be what make you beautiful too. Life, you see, when I asked you to close your eyes and think about who you are right now, that's because, unlike a sculpture, our boundaries do change. Who you are does change over time. And the trick is noticing that and aligning yourself with it and not fighting it. When you fight who you are, you waste your energy on being that other person. and it's harder and harder to be the wonderful person you already are. The heart of personal, team, and organizational agility is alignment. Alignment to self, alignment to the team, and most importantly, alignment to your context. And when we're not aligned, things feel and are really hard. There's more friction, and that stops you and your team delivering value. We need to help our teams become aware of their context so they can create their own structure to support it, perfectly aligned to the work they're doing and the goals of the organization. Agile is not a method or a process. These things emerge from teams truly working with agility. When teams have their process or method imposed upon them, they just end up fighting a system that's misaligned to them. Let's empower our teams to work in their way, to be the best they can be, to be authentic, and to own their own stories. So, in 2019, I returned to Detroit, and as I walked up Woodward Avenue with a friend, Facebook kindly reminded me that I'd actually been there exactly 2 days before on that day. This time, I'd actually just delivered that very same workshop, but it had sold out. Over that last 2 years, as I reconnected with myself and discovered my own superpowers, I had more success and, more importantly, made more close friends than I ever had before. As we walked up the street, we saw in the distance the Detroit Museum of Contemporary Art. And when I'd walked past this a couple of years before, it was all striped in pink and yellow, these colours, and this time it was all black. And I thought, oh, maybe they're between murals. Maybe it's like there's an undercoat. But as we got closer, I noticed that there was a mural on it in white neon letters across the front of the building. It just read, "Everything is going to be all right." The famous lyrics from Bob Marley. When I was in Detroit the first time, I was broken and in pain. But this city, with all the suffering it has had over 50 years, was a city of community, a city of pride, and a city of hope. A city that, despite everything, is holding on to its authenticity, holding on to the real Detroit. Thank you very much.